Sacrifice for family. My name is Amanda Carter. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Houston, Texas. 3 years ago, I made a decision that changed the trajectory of my life. I walked away from everything I'd worked for because of family. Back then, I was the general manager at a popular chain of convenience stores, clocking 60-hour weeks, working my way up the corporate ladder. I had an office with a window, a reliable paycheck, and the kind of satisfaction that came with holding everything together. My husband Mark always joked that I ran our house the way I ran my store. Efficiency charts on the fridge, a budget for every bill, color-coded family calendars pinned on corkboard in the hallway. Life was stable, maybe even predictable, and I didn't mind at all. Then, in late July, everything shook. Mom, Evelyn, collapsed while refilling her diabetes prescription at the local pharmacy. It turned out she'd been hiding just how bad things had gotten. Mismanaged insulin, mounting doctor bills, and a mortgage that was months behind. Dad tried to keep up, but he was never good with paperwork, and the stress wore away at whatever patience he had left. I didn't hesitate. The next morning, I drafted my 2-week notice at work, ignoring the pit in my stomach. I told myself it was temporary, just until things settled. But temporary has a way of stretching on when it comes to family. Mark picked up extra shifts, and together, we moved my parents into our guest room, cramming our lives into a rickety 3-bedroom house that suddenly felt way too small. My days became a cycle of doctor's appointments, insurance calls, and pharmacy runs. I learned to measure blood sugar in the dark at 2 a.m. and to bargain down hospital bills with the skill of a seasoned car salesman. Money, always tight, became a constant worry. I funneled every spare dollar into my parents' mortgage, refusing to let that house, the house with my childhood height marks carved into the doorframe, fall to the bank. I juggled so much it felt like spinning plates, medical records, after-school pickups, finding time for my own kids when I was bone-tired. Family holidays, usually a time for laughter and traditions, turned into tense meetings about pills and overdue statements. Nobody outside my household really understood. My older sister Angela lived out of state and only called on birthdays, quick to say that her career came first. I didn't blame her, but sometimes, when the weight of it all pressed down, I wished someone else would step up. But Mom still managed little acts of gratitude when she could. On shaky afternoons, she would call me her rock. And once, during a rare moment of quiet, she took my hand and whispered that the family heirloom, a delicate gold necklace with a single pearl, would one day be mine. She'd been given it by her mother, and now she wanted me to have it. For all you've done, Mandy, that promise stuck with me, a tiny gleam of hope in a sea of exhaustion. We never discussed the cost of my sacrifice as a family. I guess that's normal. Parents aren't supposed to become debts to be repaid, and children aren't meant to count every hour or dollar spent. Still, in those years, I gave more than I thought possible. My job, my savings, my rest, even the dreams I'd pressed to the edges of my mind. Sometimes I wondered if I'd gone too far, if love for family should require so much giving of oneself that there was nothing left over at the end of the day. Looking back now, it's clear I acted out of both duty and love. I wanted to believe in the power of family, the myths about unconditional support, and I poured myself into saving my parents because I thought that was what good daughters do. Every time I signed a check or sat through an endless wait in the ER, I told myself that when it was all over, it would have been worth it. That sacrifice meant something, even if no one ever said thank you. For 3 years, that was my truth. I sacrificed everything. and I never once let myself regret it. Not then, not yet. The fateful dinner, it was a sticky Sunday night in late summer. One of those humid Houston evenings where the air felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Our entire family squeezed around my parents' old mahogany dining table for what was supposed to be an ordinary family dinner. We were all a little on edge. It was the first time in years that my sister Angela had flown in from Colorado since she'd recently moved back to Texas to be closer to Mom and Dad. Or at least, that's what she told everyone. The table was crowded. Steak, macaroni and cheese, my son Joey's favorite, store-bought potato salad, and Mom's peach cobbler cooling in the kitchen windowsill. My husband Mark sat to my left, laughing with my dad as they swapped stories about Houston traffic. My own two kids squabbled good-naturedly over the last biscuit, while Angela sipped her wine, dressed in a tailored blouse and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first, the room buzzed with harmless chatter. Dad asked me about my new routine at home. How's life without those crazy store hours, Mandy? And I gave him my usual half-truth. Busy, you know. Never a dull moment with the kids and Mom's appointments. Mom gave a tight smile, but avoided my gaze, filling water glasses and fussing over napkins. To anyone peeking in through the window, we probably looked like a picture-perfect Southern family. Then the conversation shifted. Dad cleared his throat and stood up, his glass raised high. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said. The room fell quiet. We're grateful tonight, not just for this meal, but for the daughter who's always here for us, the one who stepped up and taken care of everything. My heart thudded. For a split second, I glimpsed Mom's eyes flick toward Angela. Dad's voice thundered. "To Angela, our real rock, the one who came back to make sure we're okay." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. A ripple of applause followed, cousins clapping, aunts nodding in agreement. Angela blushed, reaching for her wine with well-practiced humility. All I could do was stare at my plate, my fingers turning the napkin in my lap until it bunched between my fists. But it wasn't over. Mom reached into her cardigan pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Even before she opened it, I recognized that box. It was where she kept the family necklace, the delicate platinum chain and pearl pendant she'd promised me as a teenager. After one of her first hospital stays, she cradled it in her palm for a moment, as if weighing its significance, then looked straight at Angela. "Angela, honey, I want you to have this," Mom said, her voice tremulous but certain. "You deserve it more than anyone. For being here for us." Angela gasped, hands flying to her mouth in surprise, or what passed for it, and Mom pressed the necklace into her hands. Nobody looked at me. Not Dad, not the aunts, not even Mark. The fork scraped against plates again. The kids were oblivious, fighting over cobbler in the kitchen. I felt the world shrink around me, the air grow thick and hot. My throat burned, and my vision blurred. But I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. Instead, I quietly stood up, smoothing my dress. "We should get going," I said to Mark. He saw something in my face and nodded wordlessly, helping the kids gather their jackets. Angela clutched the necklace, beaming as everyone congratulated her. No one noticed us slip out. The door closed softly behind us, but in my mind, it slammed. Outside, the air felt cool on my cheeks, but inside I was shaking, part rage, part heartbreak, part numbness. I'd poured 3 years, my energy, my money, my life, into holding my family together, believing, stupidly, that someone would see me. A token, a word, anything. I clung to the memory of Mom's promise that the necklace would be mine, a symbol that she understood. In one night, all of it vanished, handed over across the dinner table like a party favor. On the drive home, Mark kept glancing over, wanting to say something, but not knowing how. The kids, still riding a sugar high, laughed in the back seat, totally unaware that their mother had just become invisible to her own family. I stared straight ahead, hands clenched on the wheel, a bitter ache spreading in my chest. Looking back, maybe that dinner was just the final scene of a play that had already been written. I spent years convincing myself that loyalty meant sacrifice, that family counted our actions, even if our names weren't in the spotlight. I believed a promise was forever. At that dinner, I finally realized it wasn't. That night, I didn't cry. I just made a decision. Something inside me hardened. The page turned for good. I would never again beg for their gratitude or a place at the table. Taking a stand and facing the fallout. The morning after that dinner, the world felt different. It was as if the air had changed, heavier somehow, carrying the aftershocks of what had happened in my parents' dining room. I woke up early, before dawn, before Mark or the kids stirred, to sit at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that I barely touched. It was a strange and hollow feeling, a space where obligation used to be. As I sat there, the memory of Mom handing over that necklace replayed in slow motion, the way her hands trembled just a bit, the flash of surprise, or maybe satisfaction, in Angela's eyes, the silence that followed. Under that silence, something had broken. For years, that necklace had been my anchor, a symbol of my mother's faith in everything I'd done. In a single moment, she had handed it away. And with it, all the gratitude, all the validation I'd clung to. Now, all that was left was a cold, clear line between us. For the first time, I could see that I was free to let go. But letting go is messy. You don't just flick a switch and stop worrying about people you love, no matter how deeply they hurt you. That first morning, my instincts screamed at me to open the bank app, check the mortgage payments, scan for overdue notices. My routine for years. My thumb hovered over the app on my phone, but I forced it back. Not this time. Instead, I wrote a note on a legal pad. A few hours later, my dad called. I saw his name flash on my phone and had to steel myself before I answered. "Amanda," he barked, not bothering with morning pleasantries. "The bank's calling about the mortgage again. What's going on? Why didn't you make the payment this month?" Annoyance, expectation, a touch of panic. All there, layered like an old suit he couldn't take off. For a second, I almost folded. I almost apologized. Almost promised I would wire the money as soon as I could. Like always. But something inside me held firm. "I'm not making the payments anymore, Dad. You said at dinner that Angela is the one taking care of you both now. I think it's time you let her handle things." My voice sounded oddly calm, even to my own ears. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then a string of muttered complaints. How could I be so selfish? Did I want to lose the house? Did I want my mother to end up in the street? I listened until he fell quiet, thanked him for calling, and hung up. Despite the turmoil, I felt a new sense of clarity after that call, a frightening, exhilarating freedom. I went straight to my computer, logged into my bank account, and canceled the automatic transfers to my parents' account. I deleted the reminders I'd set for refilling Mom's prescriptions and cut up the notepad where I'd written every due date for their mortgage, utilities, and insurance. For the first time in years, I wasn't organizing my life and part of my family's around someone else's chaos. Of course, reality didn't give me much room to enjoy the quiet. 2 days later, Mom called. She didn't sound like the woman who had handed my sister the family necklace. She sounded angry, desperate, her voice taut with accusation. How could you, Amanda? You know my medication costs an arm and a leg. You know your father isn't good with paperwork. Do you want us to lose the house? Lose everything? The words tumbled out, sharp and familiar, designed to hook me back into my role as rescuer. But I stood my ground. Mom, I said gently, I think I've done all I can. Angela is your real rock now. Let her help. I need to focus on my own family. I could hear her breathing, sharp and ragged, on the other end. You're making a mistake, she choked. Don't say I didn't warn you. I didn't argue. I simply hung up. My hands trembled, but it wasn't fear this time. It was the jarring sense of being free after years of invisible shackles. I didn't feel guilty, not like I expected. I felt unmoored, but stronger. That weekend, I took Mark and the kids to the park. We laughed under the Texas sun. We picnicked, played catch, chased each other. For the first time in years, I left my phone on silent, refusing to jump every time it buzzed with a family emergency. The joy was simple, uncomplicated, a reminder of what I'd been missing while drowning beneath other people's burdens. But reality always finds its way back, through mutual acquaintances, friends from church, neighbors, even the cashier at the pharmacy. I began to hear stories about what was happening at my parents' house. Angela was staying there full-time now, making a big show of fixing things. She posted about it on Facebook, snapped selfies with Mom baking cookies, and captioned it all, "Family First." I scrolled through the photos one night, anger and sadness mixing inside me. None of the pictures showed the late fees stacked up on the kitchen counter, or the fridge empty, except for half a jar of pickles. Still, I refused to intervene. The part of me that used to leap into action, a phone call, an emergency payment, a crisis managed, was quiet for once. I focused on my own world, on my marriage and my children, on rebuilding my career one freelance gig at a time. I started reading for pleasure again, joined a book club, and even attended one of Joey's baseball games without checking my phone for updates from the hospital. But there was also loneliness, and some nights regret crept in. When I lay in bed, listening to Mark's steady breathing, or glanced at old family photos, I sometimes wondered if I'd done the right thing. Family is supposed to stick together, right? But sacrifice, I realized, has limits. It has to. A week after the first call, my father rang again. This time, there was no anger, just fear. "Amanda, the mortgage is over a month overdue. They're saying we could lose the house." His voice was unsteady, uncertain. For the first time, I heard the truth in it. They needed me, not just my money, but the stability I provided for so long. For years, I'd been their insurance policy, their get-out-of-jail-free card, their silent safety net. But I wasn't anymore. I answered honestly, "Dad, I can't fix it. Please talk to Angela. I hope it all works out." This time, he didn't yell. He just hung up quietly, like he realized the last lifeline was gone. From that moment, my decision became real. Not just for me, but for my whole family. My withdrawal forced Angela and my parents to finally face their own dysfunction. I watched from the sidelines, sometimes aching to help, but knowing that any step back would erase the little ground I'd claimed for myself. Some days, the guilt was sharp and fresh. Other days, I felt a strange pride. I had said no. For the first time, I was choosing my own well-being, choosing to invest in the life I was building with Mark and the kids, instead of patching holes in a sinking ship. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean. My relationship with my parents, especially Mom, fractured further. She called less, then not at all. Holidays passed with awkward silence or stilted invitations. Angela's posts kept coming, painting a picture of familial devotion that I knew was as fragile as the truth hiding behind it. But I was learning to let go of their approval, of the idea that love meant self-erasure, of the fantasy that one day my sacrifices would be repaid with gratitude. In the end, standing up for myself was the first real step toward healing. I would always love my family, always care about their pain and their future. But I could no longer be their crutch. I wasn't abandoning them, I realized. I was finally showing up for myself. And as fall settled in Houston, I started to breathe easier, one day at a time, building a future not from sacrifice, but from self-respect in the simple joys of the life I chose. The truth begins to surface. It started small, as these things often do. An offhand comment from my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, over her rose bushes. A raised eyebrow from the pharmacist when I picked up Joey's allergy medicine. Saw your sister at the mall with your mom's credit card yesterday. She was buying a ton. Must be nice to spoil yourselves like that. I forced a tight smile, not knowing how else to respond. Angela had always been persuasive, slipping easily into whatever role suited her. Devoted daughter, family hero, social media superstar. At first, I tried not to care. I told myself I'd set those boundaries for a reason. What Angela and my parents did with their finances was no longer my business. At least, that's what I repeated in the mirror every morning. But late at night, sitting in the dim light of my home office, my thoughts tangled together, like the cords behind my old desktop. Concern for my parents' well-being, a prickle of suspicion, and a heavy, familiar sense of responsibility I just couldn't shake. It was months since the dinner, since Mark and I had walked out with our kids into the sticky Texas night. And yet, the wounds still felt fresh. I'd built a tenuous peace for myself, pouring energy into my children, my marriage, and tentative freelance gigs that paid the bills and gave me a faint sense of independence. Occasionally, Mark would suggest I check in on Mom and Dad. He'd seen my restless nights and the flicker of worry I couldn't master. You know Angela can't manage their money, he'd say gently. Not as a criticism, but as a nudge, a reminder of old loyalties. I always shook my head. It's not my problem anymore. I can't save them from themselves. But everything changed. The afternoon, I got a call from Lucy, my oldest friend, now a bank teller at Chase on Westheimer. Her voice was wary. Amanda, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I just wanted you to know there have been a lot of large withdrawals from your mom's checking account. Weird stuff, big purchases, lots of shopping, fancy electronics, way more than her usual grocery store runs. You may want to check in. Just makes my stomach hurt, seeing an old lady's account like that. I thanked her with a pit in my stomach. My resolve to butt out started to erode. That night, curiosity got the best of me. I dug up the login information to my parents' online banking. Old credentials from when I handled their bills. My hands trembled as I typed, part guilt, part adrenaline. The numbers told their own story. 4-figure Nordstrom charges, hundreds at Best Buy, airfare for a family vacation to Orlando, purchases that would have given my frugal, homebound mother a heart attack. There were overdraft fees, late mortgage payments piling up, and the credit card bill had ballooned to over $14,000 in just 6 weeks. My breath caught. This wasn't carelessness. This was recklessness. I scrolled, searching for evidence that maybe Mom and Dad had suddenly come into money, inherited a windfall, or were at least enjoying what little time they had together. But almost every charge came in Angela's orbit. New Spa Luxe treatments, Apple Store splurges, boutique lunch spots downtown. The receipts painted a grim picture. It wasn't just financial mismanagement. It was financial abuse. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, I texted my lawyer, Kimberly Hayes, a woman I'd met during my own home refinance. Steady under pressure, not easily manipulated. Something weird is happening with my parents' money.
Sorry.
Is there a way to request a formal financial audit or guardianship review without tipping Angela off? She called back in minutes, voice brisk and calm. Absolutely. Start gathering documents, statements, emails, any proof you have of past contributions, and anything that shows unusual activity. I'll walk you through the process. The following days were a blur of gathering evidence. Digging through my files, I found canceled checks, proof of mortgage payments straight from my account to the family house, hospital invoices I'd covered, notations on prescription, refill dates, and costs. I cross-referenced the records from the last 2 years, noting every time I'd transferred money directly for Mom's care. More damning was the change in spending patterns. My parents' modest withdrawals replaced by Angela's steady stream of luxury retailer charges. At home, Mark became my sounding board. He listened as I vented my outrage, pieced together tangled payment histories, and sometimes just sat with me in silence when the weight of betrayal felt too heavy. You always knew Angela was a little slippery with money, but this is another level, he said, shaking his head, his support a balm in the chaos. I felt old resentments resurface. All those years, I'd played the dependable daughter, never asking for recognition, believing, desperately, that love would be returned in kind. Now I realized, loyalty without boundaries is a door left unlocked. Angela had stepped in, not to help, but to take. Before filing anything with the court, Kimberly advised me to make one last attempt to talk directly with my parents, just so you've covered every angle. Reluctant, I dialed their home number, rehearsing my questions. Mom answered, her voice wary. "Amanda, it's been a while." I forced cheerfulness, easing into small talk, then steered gently. "Mom, are you and Dad doing okay with your accounts? I had an old friend mention something about some unusual spending." She snapped instantly, defensive. "Angela is taking care of us. We finally have someone here every day. Things are fine. You don't need to worry." Her words stung in a familiar way, rebuffing not just my concern, but my place in the family. But as she rambled, her voice betrayed a fatigue, hesitation. Once, she trailed off, uncertain. "Angela says we're fine. She keeps the receipts somewhere, I think." After the call, I was more resolved than ever. The following weeks became a campaign of quiet investigation. Friends from church who'd visited Mom and Dad confirmed that groceries were running low. Utility bills were going unpaid. And Angela kept telling them, "Oh, Amanda's cut us off. We're struggling so much." Meanwhile, I saw her Instagram posts, pedicures, new clothes, selfies at fancy brunches with captions like, "Taking care of family means putting yourself first too." I submitted my file to Kimberly, who began the petition for a court-ordered audit and temporary restraining order on Angela's access to the finances. The legal process was slow and bureaucratic, but the truth had momentum. I collected screenshots, gathered allies, documented every discrepancy. All the while, I wondered how Mom and Dad would react, whether they'd perceive my investigation as another betrayal, or finally, see it as the act of protection it truly was. The morning the paperwork arrived, I felt a strange kind of calm flood through me. There would be a hearing, witnesses, probably a lot of drama. But now, with the evidence in hand, my sense of responsibility had shifted. I wasn't sacrificing myself to save the family anymore. I was standing up for the truth, for dignity, for the legacy my parents had nearly lost. And for the first time since that fateful dinner, I slept soundly, knowing the truth had finally begun to surface, and that, wherever it led, I was done hiding from it. The legal battle. 3 weeks after I filed for the audit and court protection, I walked out my front door to find a letter wedged between the storm door and the screen. An official envelope, cold and crisp, from a law firm downtown. My stomach dropped. I tore it open right there on the porch, the morning sun turning the legal jargon into lines of black and white accusation. Angela was suing me. She claimed I'd manipulated Mom, coerced her into signing away part of the house, even gone so far as to embezzle family assets under the guise of care. If I hadn't been so furious, I might have laughed at the absurdity. Me, the daughter who'd bled herself dry to keep my parents' lives stitched together, now painted as the villain. I stood, frozen in the entryway, my hands shaking, not out of fear, but a kind of incredulous rage. I called Kimberly, my attorney, the letter still fluttering in my hand. She listened in silence, then said, "This was always a possibility, Amanda. People who take advantage don't back down without a fight." She told me to scan the papers, send every scrap of evidence, every bill I'd paid, every transfer, every notarized note from Mom thanking me for her insulin, every property tax statement with my handwriting on it. Over the next several days, our living room was transformed into a war room. Papers littered the coffee table, hospital payment confirmations, copies of my deposits toward the house, receipts for groceries and utilities. Mark helped me sort everything by date, highlighting moments when I'd stepped in to avert disaster. In box after box, I found cold proof of my sacrifice. Checks for 3 years' worth of mortgage payments, 30% of the property's value, all documented, all notarized. Kimberly built a 3-ring binder with color-coded tabs for each category: medical, mortgage, living, insurance. Angela, meanwhile, was not subtle. She paraded on social media, spinning her narrative of saving our parents, casting herself as both victim and rescuer. She posted photos of Mom smiling on the porch, of herself making pancakes, even shots of envelopes with bank logos, as if paperwork alone could prove devotion. Friends sent me screenshots. One night, a cousin messaged me, "Why is Angela saying you stole from Grandpa's estate? Call me." My name was being warped, twisted, into a tale I barely recognized. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, I met with Kimberly almost every evening after work. We went over every page of evidence, every timeline, even printing out years' worth of text messages in which my mother thanked me for troubleshooting bills and calling insurance companies late at night. The more we built our case, the more my nerves became determination. Still, the emotional toll mounted. My parents refused to talk to me directly. When I called, Mom would hand the phone to Angela or say flatly, "Talk to our attorney." Sometimes her voice would waver, like she wanted to say something else, but then she would hang up. Mark tried his best to reassure me, sitting beside me at the legal pad-strewn table, rubbing my shoulders, promising, "You're doing the right thing. The truth matters, no matter how ugly it gets." Then, a break. Kimberly received a packet of new evidence, couriered from a mutual friend who worked at the credit union. It included itemized lists of withdrawals, signatures, and security camera stills. One unmistakably capturing Angela at the ATM withdrawing cash from my mom's account. Dates matching up with the luxury purchases I'd spotted before. Alongside these were forwarded emails. Angela bragging to a friend about finally getting Mom to sign, and joking about shopping trips. When I saw the messages, my anger crystallized into resolve. Kimberly's voice was even as she laid out our strategy. We're not just defending your reputation, Amanda. We're showing a pattern. Years of commitment on your part. Recent exploitation on Angela's. We worked late into the night preparing discovery motions, witness statements, and a request for a forensic accountant to testify in person. The day of the hearing arrived. A sleepless, anxious morning. The courthouse felt colder than I remembered. Mark squeezed my hand as we walked in, his presence steady. Inside, the judge's bench loomed. On one side, me, Kimberly, our files thick as bricks. On the other, Angela, her attorney, and Mom and Dad seated stiffly, 2 rows behind, eyes fixed on the floor. Angela's lawyer spoke first, painting me as a manipulator who preyed on a vulnerable woman in failing health. He referred to me as the so-called caregiver and waved copies of the lawsuit as if volume could replace substance. I bit my tongue, fingers curling around the side of my chair. When it was our turn, Kimberly stood, voice calm, deliberate, and methodically laid out the facts. My verified deposits and wire payments, the notarized letters Mom had written, the security footage matching Angela's withdrawals, the texts, the screenshots, the testimony from neighbors who saw packages arrive in Angela's name every week. The forensic accountant testified that $17,000 at minimum had been funneled out of my parents' accounts in less than 2 months. None for medical bills, none for the mortgage. Took the stand, explaining the history of support. The years of emergency runs to the pharmacy,
It wasn't an accident.
the missed birthdays,
It was
because a
deliberate.
bill was due. The moments I left my own son's baseball game to argue with the insurance company. I described why, after the dinner,
All finished
I'd
for
stopped
you, sir.
paying.
The stains came
The
right
shock
out.
and
Here
finality
is the
of
receipt.
Mom handing Angela the necklace, the realization I was invisible in my own family. Angela's turn came. Under oath, she squirmed, dismissing the charges as random family drama, insisting Mom and Dad had given her permission for everything. But confronted with bank statements and her own careless emails, her story started to unravel. After closing arguments, the judge requested a recess. The courtroom remained tense as Mark, Kimberly, and I huddled together. I tried to read my parents' faces, but found only blank, weary stares. When the verdict came, it was brisk and clear. The judge declared that I had demonstrated consistent, documented financial support for my parents and owned a provable stake in the property. The defendant, Angela Carter, is found liable for financial abuse of an elder to the amount of $17,000 plus interest and legal fees. Full property rights revert to Amanda Carter. Silence fell. Angela slumped in her chair, her face draining of color. Mom refused to look my direction, staring at her lap. Dad's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles twitch from across the room. It should have felt like triumph, but what washed over me was relief, exhaustion, and a lingering grief for what had been lost. I'd won, but my family had been shattered in the process. Mark and Kimberly hugged me. I wasn't sure what would come next, only that I had faced the storm and told the truth, not just to the court, but to myself. That day, as we left the courthouse, the Houston sun blazed overhead. I held Mark's hand a little tighter, knowing this chapter was finally closing, and that whatever came next, I wouldn't face it alone. The truth revealed in court. The courthouse in downtown Houston, with its cool, marble corridors and flickering fluorescent lights, had always seemed distant. Somewhere for strangers, not for family. But as I walked through its towering doors that crisp Monday morning, hand in hand with Mark, my world had shrunk to the boundaries of that courtroom. This was the day everything, every secret and sacrifice, would be laid bare. Our case was the last on the docket, a scheduling twist that left too much time for nerves. Kimberly, my attorney, and I sat on a hard wooden bench outside the courtroom, rehearsing strategy for the 100th time. She kept her tone brisk and reassuring, constantly scanning through our meticulously organized evidence. Color-coded binders, thumb drives, highlighted bank statements, notarized letters. Across the hallway, I could see Angela with her attorney, head held high, talking animatedly with our parents. My mother looked pale, fragile under the courthouse lighting. My father, as always, appeared equal parts irritated and bewildered. Mark gave my hand a squeeze. No matter what, you've already done your part. Just remember that. I nodded, trying and failing to steady my breathing. Once inside, the atmosphere was tense, almost ceremonial. Everyone stood for the judge, a woman with piercing eyes and a no-nonsense voice. When we sat, all I could hear was the shuffle of papers, the anxious coughs from spectators, the faint hum of courthouse air conditioning. There was no comfort, no space for the familiar. This was a stage, and every word would matter. Angela's attorney went first, and his strategy was obvious. Dramatize, deflect, confuse. He painted a picture of confused, elderly parents, strong-armed by a daughter desperate to inherit, claimed I'd seized control over the years, and flatly denied Angela's withdrawals were anything more than gifts of gratitude. He cited gifts, loan documents, hastily drawn up, and insisted family disputes should never be weaponized. When my mother took the stand for their side, her voice wavered. She echoed the attorney's talking points, that Angela had only ever wanted to help, that I had once been helpful, but later distant. There was a hollow quality to her testimony, as if repeating lines she'd rehearsed. Her gaze never quite meeting mine. I felt a strange dissociation, like watching a movie of someone else's downfall. There were moments I wanted to stand and shout the truth. I'd been there for every hospital visit, every bill, every humiliating phone call with a collections agent. But this was not the time for emotion. It was time for facts. Kimberly stood to present our case. Unlike the dramatic flourishes of the opposing counsel, she was methodical and steady. She walked the court, exhibit by exhibit, through years of documentation, canceled checks in my name covering the mortgage, printouts of my personal bank statements showing thousands paid for mom's medication and hospital stays, emails expressing gratitude from both mom and dad. On a monitor, she queued up security footage clearly showing Angela at the bank, withdrawing cash the day of a big Nordstrom purchase. One poignant moment arrived when Kimberly produced a handwritten thank you note from my mother dated 18 months earlier. In looping cursive, Mom had written, "I don't know how we'd make it through this if it weren't for you, Amanda." It was as if we were seeing two versions of my mother, one grateful, who remembered the truth, and one afraid, lost to family politics. Next came the testimony of the court-appointed forensic accountant. He explained, in language even my parents could understand, the timelines and patterns of account activity. A sudden spike in luxury purchases, restaurant bills, travel expenses, none matching my parents' habits. With screen after screen of evidence, the reality formed. Over $17,000 had disappeared in less than 2 months. Money that should have gone toward the mortgage, utilities, and essential care. He outlined how Angela's signature appeared on withdrawals. Even email evidence where Angela described finally getting Mom to sign over the card. Throughout, Angela squirmed, but tried to maintain composure. She dressed for the spotlight, elegant blazer, understated jewelry, every inch the good daughter performing for the jury box. Her confidence started to crack as Kimberly questioned her directly, especially when shown social media photos from expensive spas, boutiques, and restaurants. Under oath, Angela claimed, "They told me it was okay. They said I deserved it for moving home." But the dates, documents, screenshots, and bank records painted a damning contrast. All the while, I watched my parents. Mom looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. Dad fidgeted restlessly, jaw clenched and lips pressed in a thin, uncertain line. Here was the ugly truth. I wasn't just exposing Angela. I was exposing the dysfunction we'd all been complicit in. The ways silence and denial keep a family sick. As closing arguments began, my emotions swelled. Kimberly spoke of duty, sacrifice, and the meaning of true caregiving. Family does not mean emptying your own future for the comfort of others. It does not mean tolerating exploitation disguised as affection. She described the years of support I had given, not out of obligation, but love, and how that trust had been betrayed. Angela's lawyer tried to sway the judge with tears and accusations. But the logic of the case was undeniable. After a short recess, the judge's verdict echoed through the silent courtroom. Based on the evidence, it is the opinion of this court that Amanda Carter provided consistent, documented financial and emotional support to her parents. The defendant, Angela Carter, is found liable for financial abuse of an elder in the amount of $17,000 plus interest and legal fees. Full property rights revert to Amanda Carter. There was no celebration, just stillness. Mark squeezed my hand. Kimberly gave a small, relieved nod. Angela stared at the floor, her composure finally gone. For the first time, the roles had reversed. The rescuer was vindicated, the saboteur unmasked. My parents' reaction gutted me. Mom said nothing, simply stood and gathered her purse, moving slowly, as if every step took its toll. Dad walked out with a dignity that came off as resignation. Neither would look at me. There was nothing left to say. Outside, sunlight flooded the courthouse steps. Reporters milled nearby, but I had no interest in publicity or pity. My only wish was for a clean ending, a release from the shadow that had loomed for years over my life. That day, the truth had been spoken, and at last, believed by more than just me. That night at home, I felt every emotion, exhausted, relieved, and unbearably lonely. Mark, always my anchor, held me quietly. I wept, not out of defeat, but from the release that only comes with surviving a storm and stepping into light. Justice had been served. The truth had won, not just in court, but in my own heart. The epilogue of freedom. 4 months after the verdict, the house was officially mine. The deed arrived in a thick manila envelope from the county courthouse. The notary's stamp barely dry on the paperwork. I held it in my hands, this symbol of so much pain and perseverance, and felt a strange, trembling peace settle over me. Outside, Houston was drenched in late autumn sunlight, the air clear and cool. For the first time in years, I felt the world shifting beneath my feet, the boundaries of my life opening up instead of closing in. I spent a week sorting through the house, not just as an administrator, but as someone ready to claim her own story. Box by box, I packed away the detritus of decades. Faded report cards, tacky souvenirs from road trips long forgotten, receipts for things we no longer owned. The hardest part was boxing up my childhood room, now eerily preserved and yet utterly alien. I found a stack of old journals shoved behind the dresser, notes from teenage years, when I still believed the world was just. and that fierce love could conquer anything.
I know this is
I
unexpected.
leafed through
I'm
a
so
few
sorry,
pages
but we
in
have to
silence,
talk.
then closed them tight. This time, I wasn't clinging to the past. I was making peace with it. Angela moved out first, her exit orchestrated like a scene from a drama I'd seen too many times. She left in the middle of the afternoon, carting her designer bags and a few suitcases to a waiting Uber, sunglasses drawn low over her eyes. She didn't say goodbye. She barely looked at the house itself, but paused on the porch to snap a final selfie, a small, wry smile on her lips. She posted it to social media before her ride even pulled away. My parents lingered another 3 weeks, their anger seeming to dissipate, replaced by exhaustion and resignation. I tried to keep things civil, helping them box up essentials, arranging for a moving truck, and even searching online for affordable apartments in the outer suburbs. There was a brief, awkward moment one morning when Mom stood in the kitchen, gazing at the sunlight streaming through the window. "You used to love this house," she said quietly, her words floating somewhere between accusation and nostalgia. I nodded, not trusting myself to answer. On the day they left, Dad shook my hand. It was formal, almost businesslike. "Don't let anybody take what's yours," he muttered, a flash of something like pride, maybe even regret, in his tired eyes. Mom pressed a wrinkled envelope into my hands, her lips tight. I waited until they were gone before I opened it. Inside, a short note. The house was painfully empty for days after. At night, echoes clung to every corner. The creak of the hallway, where I'd measured my children's heights. The sharp memory of laughter and shouting at Thanksgiving dinners. The hush of secrets unspooled during stormy Houston nights. Sometimes I mourned what felt irretrievably lost, not just the family, but the version of myself who had believed that love guaranteed fairness, that loyalty was always repaid with kindness. But the emptiness, I realized, was also freedom. For years, every waking moment had belonged to someone else. My parents' appointments, their mortgage, Angela's latest crisis. Now, there was space. Room for my own voice, my own dreams. One crisp Sunday, with the windows thrown wide and sunlight pooling on the hardwood floors, I gathered my family, Mark and the kids, for a final ritual. We sat in a circle on the living room rug, surrounded by a handful of boxes, eating pizza straight from the box and telling stories about the pieces of our life packed away around us. Joey picked up an old baseball mitt and tossed it in the air. "Are we sad the house isn't ours anymore, Mom?" he asked. I looked around at the walls bared of photos, and I answered honestly, "No, baby. This place was never really about the house. It's about us, and we're together." The next week, I met with a realtor and began the bittersweet process of selling the house. There was paperwork and negotiations, a string of hopeful buyers, and hollow promises. In the end, it sold to a young couple expecting their first child, a fact that brought an unexpected joy. I left a note for them, tucked into the kitchen drawer, wishing them laughter, love, and the wisdom to know when to let go. The proceeds changed everything. I settled my lingering debts, paid down Mark's student loans, and set up college funds for both kids. Small beginnings, but more security than we'd ever known. We bought a compact, sunlit home on the quieter side of town. 3 bedrooms, a shaded backyard, neighbors who smiled and waved as we moved in. It was enough. For the first time, we could build a life anchored not in sacrifice, but in choice. Letting go of the past was not a perfect, poetic transformation. There were moments of regret, flashes of anger when Angela's name came up, ache when the holidays rolled around and the invitations felt stilted or didn't come at all. I missed some things more than I cared to admit. The routine of caring for someone, the sense of being needed, even the comfort of old wounds. But mostly, what I felt was relief. One rainy afternoon, as I unpacked a final box in my new kitchen, I found the necklace, the one Mom had given Angela, but which had somehow, months later, found its way back to me through a mutual friend. Tucked beside it was a note in Angela's neat, sharp handwriting. "You wanted this to mean something. Maybe it never could. I'm sorry." I stared at the necklace, rolling the pearl gently between my fingers. It was, finally, just a piece of jewelry, a reminder of promises kept and broken, of the dangers of tying your worth to someone else's approval. I put it away, not out of bitterness, but because I knew at last my value didn't come from heirlooms, from property, or even from forgiveness. It came from surviving, from standing up, from building something honest out of the rubble of old hurts. With Mark and the kids, I started new rituals, filling that smaller house with the clatter of breakfast dishes, lazy Sunday afternoons, long walks through leafy parks. I read before bed for the first time in years, joined my book club again, and found myself actually laughing, not just performing happiness for others. I was lighter, freer, and, in the hush of twilight, dishes done, children sleeping, Mark's hand warm in mine, I gave myself permission to hope, to believe that sometimes freedom isn't just the absence of old burdens, but the presence of new beginnings. In the end, I was not defined by what my family had taken, but by what I chose to reclaim. This was the true inheritance, the real ending. Not a necklace, or even a house, but my own hard-fought freedom, made sacred by the simple, radical act of living for myself.